This is KM Weiland, and you are listening to the 506th episode of the Helping Writers Become Authors podcast. This episode of Helping Writers Become Authors is brought to you again in partnership with Podtone. If you're a podcaster who's struggling or unsure about your recording quality, or if you need help editing, mixing, or mastering your podcast, Podtone is a team of producers and professional audio engineers dedicated to providing budget-friendly, customizable solutions for podcasters. In addition to mixing the sound every week for this podcast, they've worked with me to make it sound better in many ways. So if you're interested, you can visit them at podtone.com or drop them an email at info@podtone.com to get started today. I cannot believe we are halfway through May already. I took a swift break this week from some of my normal tasks in order to focus on updating my goals and schedules for the upcoming year, and I was happy to realize I'm maybe even a little ahead of schedule on all my projects. I'm still working on the first draft of Writing Your Story's Theme, which I plan to publish later this year. I'm also finishing up some final research for the blog series on archetypal character arcs, which should also debut in a few months. And I'm almost ready to get back to my Dreamlander sequel's outline for the reckoning that will determine whether I'm able to break through the plot blocks that have had me stymied for so long. So wish me luck on that. And now I hope you enjoyed the podcast, Creativity versus Distraction, 13 Tips for Writers in the Age of the Internet. I was 12 when I learned how to use my first hand-me-down computer. It ran Windows for workgroups and played games like Crystal Caves and Commander Keen. Getting that computer was a life-changing experience. In some ways, it was probably the event that truly fated me to be a writer. Although I had written stories on a typewriter, the computer was a delightful toy that pulled me deeper into the possibilities of word processors and design software. I wrote as much because I liked typing away at the computer as much as I liked the actual writing. When I was 15, my computer got hooked up to the internet. It was dial-up, which meant only one computer in the house could be connected at a time. It loaded a 3-minute video in about 3 hours. And in absolutely definite ways, it put me on the career path of a writer. The innovations that followed rapidly in the next 10 years, not least among them the advent of the Kindle and the self-publishing boom, were timed to allow me opportunities that past generations couldn't even have imagined. So the internet has been good to me in ways large and small. It's allowed me to make a living doing something I'm passionate about. It's allowed me the ability to talk to all of you every week and to get to know so many people I would never have encountered in actual life. It's taught me to be a better writer. It's allowed me to live in the middle of nowhere and still purchase just about anything I could want from just about anywhere in the world. It's given me access to the world's library of books, music, and movies. It's put a mind-boggling amount of information at my fingertips. It's plugged me in to a global community of opinions, news, passion, support, and possibilities. 20 years after first dialing up the internet on my clunky old computer, I take for granted how phenomenally this technology has affected my life as a person and a writer. But along with all the blessings have come an equal number of challenges. If I sometimes take for granted the gifts given me by the internet and its related technologies, I also sometimes take for granted how much its very blessings are also its curses. If the internet has given my creativity a voice and a platform, it has also encroached upon the way I create. My 15-year-old self could have had no idea how this technology would change her life and the world in the next 2 decades. She could have no idea how this technology would literally change her brain, her very physiology. In short, if the astounding technologies of our lifetime have given us countless good things, they have also given us internet brain. And this creates concerns for any human, anywhere, who uses a screen, and honestly, for those who don't, too. But as writers, we must confront special challenges in protecting and empowering our creativity in this age of the internet. When I was 15 and just starting out as a writer, I had no idea that I would face challenges much different from those encountered by Charles Dickens, other than the ink-stained fingers, of course. But in the last half of those 2 intervening decades, I have found myself putting more and more energy into combating the totally unexpected challenges of the very real ways in which my brain has changed. The comparative carefreeness of childhood aside, I've recognized it has become so much more difficult for me to sink into the dream space where the stories live. A lifetime of habits and skills keeps me writing, but it's not the same as back in the day. And as I've been chronicling in the past year or so particularly, I'm not too happy about that. Despite the fact that I've always been determined not to let technology run my life, I'm far more addicted to and affected by it than I want to admit. It's a catch-22 since, as noted, the internet is both the blessing and the bane of my life as a writer. But I am determined to learn to live in peace and even true creative productivity with this omnipresent centrifuge of my life. So, to that end, here are some steps that I believe are important to help writers walk that fine line between being masters of our technology or being mastered by it. Now, I recognize that the first, the biggest, and probably the most important task I must accomplish is to reduce the amount of distraction I allow into my life. Without hindering necessary functions, I must learn how to take back ownership of my own brain, and with it, my creativity. So here are steps to mitigate distraction. Step number 1, turn off notifications and texts. Our computers and phones are great at letting us know about things right away. But probably 95% of those things, whether notifications from email, social media, text, or even phone calls, they're hardly crucial, much less time sensitive. Every time one of them pings into our attention, our concentration is broken. Whether this happens during an actual writing session, or perhaps just a daydream, we've lost at least a measure of momentum and continuity. So the solution? Turn off the notifications and/or log out of sites and apps when you're not actively using them. If you can't see or hear them, they can't control where your attention goes. Step number 2, never use more than one screen at a time. These days we may have the TV on in the background while we're typing at our computers with our phones, or even multiple phones nearby just in case any notifications come through. This is rarely, if ever, as productive as it seems. It trains us to be ever less present, even as it divides and conquers our limited attention into multiple surface channels rather than encouraging a single deep dive. So the solution is to make a strict one screen at a time rule. If you're watching TV, watch TV. If you're using the phone, use the phone. If you're writing on your computer, write on your computer. Step number 3, opt out of ads when you can. Part of the problem with #internet life is that we have so little control over our experience. We may Google an article we need for research, only to be bombarded by half a dozen cookie-enhanced animated ads urging us to stop writing and go buy something. At the very least, our attention is now schismed. One minute we're thinking about how our character might escape the guillotine. And now we're thinking that, yeah, that new yoga mat is super cute and maybe we should buy one or at least go look at it because what can it hurt? It's just a second. Oh wait, I just wasted 20 minutes of writing time. So the solution is to use ad blocker where you can, although this does seem to be growing less effective. Or if you're able, splurge for the ad-free versions of your favorite sites, apps, and subscription services. The ads seem harmless enough, but it's shocking how much static they add to our daily lives, not to mention how much time they get us to waste window shopping and impulse buying. Of course, when none of the above is possible, you can always opt for not jumping on the internet for that quick research check while in the middle of creative time. Step number 4, resist crazy tabs in your browser. My regular internet routine of checking email, social media, and other daily necessities, and some not so necessities, sees me opening 20 to 30 tabs in my browser and then blowing through them as fast as possible. It's time effective, and it's stimulating enough to keep my attention even on the routine boring tasks. But I know it contributes to my internet brain. How can it not? So the solution, and I admit I'm still struggling with this one, mostly because I haven't found an alternative that gets me through my work as quickly. But when possible, I encourage trying not to open more than a handful of tabs at once. In fact, one tab at a time would be PG. Even just having tabs open in the background, I currently have 5 open, 2 as reminders to do things later, keeps you from focusing completely on what you're actually doing. Step number 5, categorize tasks into related groups. One of the problems with crazy tabs is that it has your brain jumping all over the place. One minute you're checking your bank account, the next you're liking a cat video on Facebook, then you're trying to understand some heavy-duty article about world economics, then you're confirming your grocery pickup order, all in the span of 5 minutes. On the one hand, that's kind of impressive. On the other, no wonder our brains are fried. So the solution, which is something I'm experimenting with, is grouping all my crazy tabs into categories. By grouping all these social media sites together, all the articles I'm reading together, all the emails I'm answering together, I'm at least giving my brain a chance to settle on one type of task for a longer period of time. Step number 6, unsubscribe, unsubscribe, unsubscribe. So it's just good email hygiene to go through your inbox at least once a year and unsubscribe from anything you don't read and or don't truly benefit from. However, most of us aren't so great at this. I'm just now doing my first email purge in years, and I'm surprised by how much stuff I received that I brainlessly delete without reading and or browse through daily even though I never find anything that actually enhances my life. And yet, even just taking the time to notice and reject or delete an email is a precious bit of attention wasted over and over again on a daily basis. So the solution, clean up your inbox. Delete all the junk so you don't have to look at it anymore. Put stuff in folders so it's organized and you can find it when you want it. And unsubscribe like a crazy person. If you don't read it, unsubscribe. If it doesn't enhance your life or encourage you to be a better person in some specific way, unsubscribe. Step number 7, do one thing at a time. Even when we're not on the internet, but especially when we are masters of multitasking. But studies have shown multitasking actually doesn't make us more productive. We feel busier and therefore more productive, but because our attention is split, we're not able to dig as deep. Granted, sometimes focusing on one task at a time does mean we get less done. But actually standing there and waiting while the coffee perks instead of checking email or browsing Pinterest for inspiration can be exactly the reset time our brains need before we turn our attention to writing. So the solution here is simply become conscious of when you're multitasking. Often we do this without even recognizing it, or we may even think we're doing it as part of a useful strategy. For example, when I'm in the midst of a comparatively boring task, such as typing up notes, I will quote-unquote bribe myself into focusing by hopping over to browse Etsy every 10 minutes or so. Yes, it makes the boring job more fun, but is it really helping me be more productive? I think not. And step number 8, turn off the internet, use focus enhancing extensions, or set up different machines or accounts. It is one thing to decide to limit technology. It's another thing entirely to resist popping onto the computer to check our email real quick. It's just 5 seconds. After all, we're not even going to respond. We just want to see if anything new came in. Or maybe it's killing us that we can't name that familiar celebrity we saw in last night's movie. So we pop on real quick just to remember that, oh yes, that's who she is. Or maybe our story requires us to know the name of the 26th Vice President of the United States. So we pop on real quick, and before we know it, we're 30 pages deep in Wikipedia. Or that yoga mat ad got the better of us again. Even when we're true to our self-promise and the visit is indeed real quick, we've still severed our attention. We have to start all over, and then when the next urgent need pops into our heads 10 minutes later, we have to start all over again and again and again. So, the solution. Sometimes willpower and good habits aren't enough. Sometimes we have to physically remove ourselves from temptation. When possible, it's often helpful to create 2 desks or computers or accounts to help us separate necessary internet work from our creative work. We can also simply unplug the internet during writing time. Or we can find an add-on or app that will block our inability to control ourselves. I'm currently experimenting with an app called Freedom. Now, controlling and cutting down on distraction is the first step in reclaiming our full creative capacity. But from there, we also have to look for ways to nurture the creativity itself. So here are 5 steps to enhance creativity. Step number 1, ground yourself. Take time every day to return your brain to its full and deep potential. Meditating, doing yoga, as long as you aren't using it as an excuse to go yoga mat shopping, or even taking a walk or a bath can be all it takes to reclaim your brain. You may also need to take it a step further. If your emotions are all over the place, it will be difficult to fully be present to your creativity. You may need to actively work through anxiety and even trauma. This may take time, but in my opinion can totally be counted as creative work. Step number 2, make time for active imagination. In addition to your writing sessions, try to make time for regular artists' dates, as Julia Cameron calls them. This can take any variety of forms, but one of the most pertinent is focusing on what Carl Jung called active imagination, and what I've always thought of as dream zoning. In other words, make space and time to just zone out and daydream. Because this is a form of active meditation, it is not the time to let your thoughts wander and think about any old thing. Nor is it necessarily the right time to work through your feelings. It should be a time of watching the movies in your head. Step number 3, become conscious of monkey mind. So 1 minute, I'm thinking about writing. And then I'm thinking about what I read this morning, and then I'm remembering something that happened yesterday. And then I'm thinking about my plans for the day, and then I'm realizing my thoughts are all over the place. Every time you recognize your thoughts are a train that's come off the track, focus on bringing yourself back to conscious presence. Just like the unwanted ads on the internet, we can learn to discipline our minds to focus primarily on the thoughts that bring the most value into our lives. And I'm not talking about doing this just during meditation. Do it all the time. Step number 4, concentrate on the pictures rather than the words. One thing I've realized about the difference between my pre-internet brain and my post-internet brain is that my creative thinking used to manifest largely in pictures and now manifests largely in words. Instead of walking through life and seeing stories, now I just talk to myself incessantly. Psychologists say the unconscious has no language. It speaks to us solely through symbols or images. To me, that says I'm much less in touch with my unconscious creativity than I used to be. So now, in the down moments of my life, I am trying to shut up and see again. And step number 5, savor your beautiful life. I've decided, somewhat belatedly, that my word for this year is savor. I want not just to be present, not just to ground my wandering and distracted brain, but to savor everything around me, whether it's the golden sun in the green leaves, or the cardinals prattling at each other, or just putting on my pants in the morning. It's my life, and I don't want to miss a second of it. And so now I hope that you will share your opinion with me on this. What do you struggle with in balancing creativity and distraction these days? If you'd like to be part of the Word Player community over on my site and join in the conversation on this subject, be sure to stop by the website at helpingwritersbecomeauthors.com. You can always find a transcript of the most recent podcast and add your voice to the discussion by visiting the first post on the site's homepage. And don't forget that if you're looking for an older post, you can always find those by putting the podcast title in the search field at the top of the right-hand column. If you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or whatever your favorite podcast platform may be. And if you'd like to support Helping Writers Become Authors, I would totally appreciate it if you'd consider taking the time to leave a quick rating or review on your site of choice. Thank you so much for listening to the Helping Writers Become Authors podcast, and be sure to check back again next week.